to DameSmiff.
Yeah, give me the loot, give me the truth, give me the bass, give me the drop, give me the truth, give me the you, give me the hate. I'm making it hot when in the booth. I spit the truth, I open doors, you got it unlocked. She like to shoot, get to the loot, you play the games, I make it pop. I got the moves, you peep the tunes, we're not the same. You probably flop. Point the shooters, looky lookers, haters hate, poppers pop. Running to the game, why stop? It'd be a shame that I'm not on top. She said, Dame, you're my favorite, cause when you play this, the haters, they see me working, but I'm making play and then they ate it. I really hate it, I really hate it. I hate it, they tried to play us. I know they hate us, but they faking. I spit it straight in, I'm never chasing. She love it, she measure taped it, but never taped it. She bugging, she peeped the greatness. She know who Dame is, she love it. I have to say this, mommy, hold up, let me tell you something. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, 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 baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Yeah. She shook the tambourine for this. Pose magazine with this. If I spit some real, mix it in the beans a bit. Would she think I'm about to scheme a bit? Yo, peep the scene a bit, baby, lean a bit. That thing got a mean sit. I got the flow to make a genie wish. These jeans are split. So what? I got you rockin' to a beat that kicks. I got the big dog flow. You spittin' drool for me. That's why she grip mine. Make the gym a pool for me. 25 years, no jewelry. Diamonds over veggies wasn't cool to me. She's such a problem, make a fool of me. Never allow it, got the juice for free. She pulled me close, said you know who I be. Some people in this world say we be I.E. But love, let's not play favorites, baby. Yeah. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, 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 baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. Let's not play favorites, baby. What's going on, y'all? It's with Jacket. How you guys doing today? We're pretty much going to be talking about men and women's dynamics, especially in the music industry. But a lot of it is just going to be kind of like just a bare bones, basic, kind of conversation, really. We're not really going to dive deep into like how to get female fans. It's really going to be about like understanding the difference, right? And then now that we will then understand the differences, how we'll be able to manage that difference. And so for a lot of times when we're dealing with, let's say, audiences of different cultures and different genders and networks, we have to really think about all the nuances that come with that in order for us to really make sure we're getting at least what we desire out of our interactions. Like, sometimes we have like good intentions, but because it's shrouded in like fusion, communication, right? So what we're going to be diving into, if you guys are interested in this conversation, make sure you hit the like button and also hit the subscribe button. Like button to basically tell people that if you do like this video, they should also check it out. Subscribe button will help you streams of it. So for many of you, you may not actually, and the key thing to understand when we have this conversation here on this channel is that what we're trying to really do here is bridge the gap between fans, investors, and we're really trying to look for a huge difference in how we see each other, trying to look for the different looking at each other as asset versus transaction. So when we're diving into this, most of this is going to be from things you may or may not agree with. In the long term, what we're really trying to fix here is the understanding. So once we figure that part out, it's going to be a lot easier to figure out who it is we're talking to, how we want our audiences to be understood, and how we want to build our network. So as we get into it, guys, to check out the first clip here, and it's going to really dive deep, I guess you could, biological. So we'll see it from the perspective of science. That way we check those. The OBS crash. So yes, as I was saying, we are actually starting off this week with, well, we're continuing this week's conversation of building a network. But today's topic is about how to do it between men and women. So this is going to transcend the culture conversation that we had yesterday, right? We talked about cultures like Japanese culture, where you could have an audience of Japanese people and how they use body language differently, right? And then we looked at even just natural body language communication, just within people interacting with each other, things like that, right? So now we're going to look at it more of a gendered perspective. The reason we're going to do this is because it's going to show us that A, we may or may not know the differences, right? And then B, we're also going to look at that these are still, I guess you can say, trigger points of your audience and even your artists that people use in the music industry to help deliver music sales, music business, or just better music in general, right? And so once we consider these things, we can really take an advantage of what we learn. What we want to focus on a lot of times is figuring out what's going to make sense for the results we want. And that's why I always implore people to kind of be very clear on what they want from the music industry and not necessarily just go into things asking or not really considering what they could get in return for what they're asking for in the music, right? So for example, let's say you want to have communication better with your female audience as a male musician, right? That looks a certain way. And then vice versa for women, that looks a certain way. So we're going to dive a little bit more into how that really works for one another and then see if we can bridge the gap between, like I said, the fans, investors, and artists in terms of this conversation, right? So as I said before, make sure you hit the like button. Also, make sure you are hitting subscribe so that way you can catch my. We're going to get into our first clip of the morning. Let's get right to it.
Are talking about the red pill, we are just talking about factual absolutism. I mean, we're just saying what is true and what is not true. How you use that truth, how you use, and it's really sort of a pursuit of truth is what it is. Praxiology, outside of sort of the economics definition, there's two definitions. There's the economics definition, and then there's the classical Greek definition, which is a praxiology is the study of human behavior, in that human behavior has purpose, has intent, there's a reason why we do those things. It's not about good. It's not about evil. It's not about what's right, what's wrong. It's not even about what's best practices. It's just getting to the point, finding out why we do what we do.
Okay, so a little bit of what we're going to be doing today is going to follow that kind of line of thinking, right? And I'm going to actually look it up accurate. So what he's explaining is that we're really just looking at this from an understanding, right, perspective. We're not really trying to shame or dictate or even shape how we communicate, men and women, right? We're really just trying to see, well, if we just look at ourselves for, let's say, 500 years, and then we just notice all of the things that happen through patterns, right? Through consistency. What are we doing, right? And we got to name the things that we're doing. And then we got to also think about why we're doing these things, right? So this right here is Rollo Tamassi. He wrote a book called The Rational Man, where they kind of talk about these things. Well, they go really deep into these topics, but from like a whole lot of different angles. But in particular, because we're talking about music here, this is going to be something to think about when you're considering your network, your audience, people you do business with, all these things. It's going to transcend all of this, right? And so, though he's having the conversation through, let's say, the lens of relationships between men and women, like intimate, things like that,
you can still kind of like see and understand these things, so that way you can have, I guess you can say, more utility with your good intentions with what you want to do with this, right? So a lot of people will think like, oh, if I learn a lot, I can do a lot of sneaky, sadistic things, right? But that's not necessarily the case here. This is more so of just learning what is out here, what people do, what humans are, and things like that, right? Once we get into like, oh, these certain kinds of people will do this, then that's a different conversation, right? More of a stigma thing, right? So let's get into it. A praxeology is the deductive study of human action based on the fundamental axiom that humans engage in purposeful behavior rather than purely reflexive or involuntary reaction, right? It asserts that economics and social sciences can be built on logical deductions from this primary truth, much like geometry. Okay, so that's what the definition is that it has been given, right? And so we're going to have Rollo kind of explain it one more time, but the key thing to understand here is that the things you're going to feel about what we're going to learn today are not the primary thing, even though you're going to feel, right? So for example, when you guys watch a action movie or a horror movie, like the villain does something like very, very, right? A lot of times it's explained as just because they're evil, right? But there actually is, considering what they're doing and how the context is of the movie, there actually is usually a biological reason to what they're doing, right? It's less to do with their social beliefs, their political beliefs, and their religious beliefs, or even their upbringing sometimes. Sometimes it literally is some kind of biological reaction or, imperatives. That's what we're going to get into.
And it's really sort of a pursuit of truth is what it is. Praxeology, outside of sort of the economics definition, there's two definitions. There's the economics definition, and then there's the classical Greek definition, which is a praxeology is the study of human behavior, in that human behavior has purpose, has intent, there's a reason why we do those things. Mm-hmm. It's not about good. It's not about evil. It's not about what's right, what's wrong. It's not even about what's best practices. It's just getting to the point, finding out why we do what we do. And in the red pill sense, that's about intersexual dynamics. It's about male nature, female nature, evolutionary psychology, sociology, neurology, endocrinology. How many ologies do we have, And so it's a very, very broad spectrum, because when you think about how many ways intersexual dynamics crosses into all these like subfields, when people ask me, they say, well, what's the red pill? Give me the elevator pitch for the red pill. There is no elevator pitch for the red pill, because it's like a college major.
Yes.
It's not a bumper sticker. It's not something you just slap on the back of your car and say, I'm red pill, right? So when I'm talking about red pill, I'm talking about like empirical, factual absolutism about the things that are, not the things that should be. Mm-hmm. The problem is right now, there's too many people who want to jump into this space and say, this is what should be. So I don't talk about best practices. I talk about what is.
Yes.
So when people say, well, the red pill is this or the red pill is that, it's like, no, you haven't been in this field long enough to understand what a praxeology is, or
I
what
find most people who talk
are.
about it and who criticize it now, it's very clear they first came across the term sometime in the last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, people think that the red pill begins and ends with Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis. Mm-hmm. That's what they think. And when I listen to personalities like Destiny say, oh, the red pill's dead, it's over now. I'm like, no, dude, it's been going on for, at least in my case, for the last 22, 23 years. Yeah. You simply don't have the depth of knowledge of how we even got to this point in the first place. Because if it makes if it gets click-through rate, if it gets eyes on the screen, if it gets audience retention, if it gets impressions on YouTube, then that's the new hot topic, and everybody wants to be a part of it.
So that's really what's going to be holding a lot of people that are going to see this back from the conversation, is that you're going to have to kind of push aside a lot of your influences from what you're about to listen to, right? Because let's say your parents told you one thing about how to speak to men and women, right? Maybe they were like, oh, if you see an old man, make sure you be kind and gentle, right? And if you see an old lady, make sure you help her cross the street, right? But they never really explained to you how to treat an old mean man or an old mean woman, right? And it's not necessarily, like we said in the beginning, a right or wrong thing. It's just what happens and why does the humans interact with each other this way, right? What is the real point of all of this, right? And so when you look at it from this perspective and then you try to apply it to, let's say, a music career, a lot of times you will look at, let's say, a Finesse 2 Times and think like, well, what is he thinking right now? To try to, understand his decision making. And then if you look at a situation where there's a Yoko Ono in the Beatles, right? And you're looking at everybody in the situation, you're trying to understand, well, what are they thinking right now? What is happening? What are we trying to understand? Well, a lot of times what you're trying to understand can be filtered through your belief system, how you were raised, and perhaps whatever you're just, your implicit bias is. Maybe you don't like people that are, have a certain tone or have a certain delivery and things like that. Maybe you don't like big muscular people, so you just treat them a certain way, whatever it could be. But the key thing is that what we're gonna have to do, and what he's explaining here, is that there's actually a lot of just raw information that has unfortunately been filtered through a lot of our belief systems that has now kind of muddied up what the information really represents.
Good news is that these things come in cycles. So during 2015, 2016, that election cycle, red pill was whatever people wanted to make it. In 2019, 2020, everybody wanted to pivot out of red pill and wanted to get into social issues and MAGA this and alt-right that. And now we see exactly the same thing happen. So that's when I was talking to Myron and Fresh in March of 2021. That's why I said, I hope not, because what happens is individuals come into the space and they got no business being in the space. Yeah. And suddenly they become authorities on the red pill and they don't even know what they're talking about because they have no background in it. And for the red pill to remain about the facts, about empirical, reality, about the data, about the stats, about the praxiology of the red pill, it kind of has to stay underground. Yeah. It has to, or underground, maybe that's not their term, but it has to be in some way like non-mainstream. Right?
Yeah, well, it gets corrupted otherwise. I mean, one question I was wondering from your perspective, I mean, firstly, how much do you care about sort of owning that term? Is that something, do you get annoyed when you see the term being misused or just sort of being used as a pejorative or just being thrown in this way?
It gets into gatekeeping. It gets into a lot of gatekeeping stuff. And some people, we've had discussions about this before in some of the groups I'm in. Should we be gatekeeping? Should we not be gatekeeping? I've always been of the opinion that the red pill is open source. Okay. So I'm not the first word and I'm not the last word. I'm a very loud voice. I've been consistent in the red pill, like I said, for 20 some odd years. So I'd like to think I have at least some sort of authority in this. I have some sort of recognition and some sort of definitely some notoriety in this. But I'm not the last voice. I'm not the first voice. I'm not the last voice. And by the way, Andrew Tate and Pearl Davis are most definitely not going to be the first or the last either. Well, so same with Myron and Fresh, right?
It's interesting with Tate because Tate, as far as I know, doesn't even call himself.
Not anymore, but
did he?
What's interesting? Oh yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I did some of the earliest interviews with Tate. People don't understand my background and my history with Tate. When people say, "Oh, Rollo threw Tate under the bus" or whatever, I'm kind of Tate agnostic right now. But I did some of the earliest interviews with Tate on my own channel back in 2017 and 2018.
Okay. So how many of you know about the people he's talking about? Tate, Pearl, and all. Right. Well, what he's really highlighting here is that the conversation between the communication between men and women is actually fractured. It's divided, right? But it's divided usually through either side's own personal biases, right? And their own beliefs and their filters, like I was saying. So considering that, there may be a lot of things that we all have kind of believed or subjected ourselves to that might not be accurate, right? And so the ability to learn that and observe that kind of thing, even about yourself or other people, kind of leads him to see kind of phases in the media. Like you'll see different phases of media that'll say, we find value in thinking this way and we don't find value in thinking this way. And then they'll try to monetize, let's say, the content about that, right? But all in all, they're still trying to communicate with still the same people, monetizing through the same networks, but then also using the, I guess you can say, belief systems that they have to try to navigate the gender dynamics between the two, right? And so now we have to figure out as musicians, if we want to, play this quote unquote content game, does this even play a role when we're writing songs, right? If we want to write an R&B song for, let's say, a certain kind of woman or group of women, how does this communicate to them? What are we really saying to them? And then when they're communicating back to us as fans, what does this really mean? Right? And then when we're trying to consider all of the filters and how we think of people and stuff like that, we have to then remove that to really understand, at least at a core data point, like an AI system, what's really happening and how we can actually understand what we're communicating to one another.
And so I've known him. I've known Tristan for probably longer than anybody who wants to, tell you they went to high school together with him, which they didn't, right? So back in the day, he definitely wanted to be Red Pill. He was part of our Red Pill. Well, what was the Manosphere back then? He was definitely part of that group. And then Tate morphed into the Tate that we know from 2020 on. And so he became, he sort of metamorphized into something, that we think of as Andrew Tate right now. But back then he definitely he called himself Red Pill, even on my show. So, but now of course what happens is once we get into an election cycle and everybody wants to pivot away, now everybody's Red Pill adjacent, right? And to me, that's.
So he says to him, that's fence right. And in a sense, what you really have to figure out here now, I wanted to use that as the first video to really show you that there's actually going to be your own biases, right? All of us have them, whether it's how we were raised, whether it was how a dude treated us, or whether that girl picked on us in high school, right? All of that matters. Then I also want to show you that even though it matters, you may figure out that that matters and then try to look for information. And then the information source may be fluid, right? You may think, oh, this woman's smart. You may know what she's talking about. But then suddenly drifts into another, opinion or perspective. You may say the same thing about another dude, right? And so now you have to figure out, how do I navigate all of this to get accurate communication skills between men and women, right? Usually we try to dive to the scholars, the really, really, really highly respectable people, right? Or the highly experienced folk. And so that's kind of what I wanted to lay this ground for, is just to show you that there are people that are content creators of all kinds of walks and areas and things like that, that have, I guess you can say, specialized perspectives, right? But what we're actually looking for comes from a consistent source, meaning that they're all bouncing on and off of some topic, right? Some kind of talking point. But where does that talking point come from? So we got to go straight to the beginning in order for us to draw our perspectives and our conclusions about what's really happening. Okay? So let's get into the next clip. And this one should actually be a good one for us to really understand a little bit deeper what Rollo was talking.
And then we found some attributes that were highly variable across cultures in whether people found these as desirable or indispensable or irrelevant. So if you talk about universal desires, so things that men and women share, things like intelligence, kindness, mutual attraction and love, good health, dependability, emotional stability, although there's a bit of a sex difference there with women preferring it a bit more than men. So you go to anywhere in the world and these are qualities that people universally desire in long-term mates.
Okay, so he's laying here the foundation of what we're going to kind of talk about, is that there's just a foundational, consistent things you will see across the board around the world between men and women on how we communicate with each other, right? Now, they're speaking in the context of romantic partners, so just keep that in context, right? But who's speaking right now is Dr. David Buss, and he's an American evolutionary psychologist at the University of Texas at Austin, okay? And the key thing about him is that he's recognized as one of the founders of his field, best known for his groundbreaking research on human sex differences in mate selection, sexual conflict, jealousy, and the darker aspects of human nature, right? He's written plenty of books. You guys can check them out for yourself and validate them for your own beliefs, right? But the key thing here is that the information he has to provide, we can now look at as one of the key sources alongside anybody else that you want to use to juxtapose for comparison and contrast, right? And so once we do this, as musicians, this is going to be good information for you to use when it comes to your marketing, how you're going to develop brand communication from one another, and then, of course, build better communication skills for developing relationships within your business, right? So let's say you're a manager or you're a PR, right? Or let's say not PR, an A&R, using the wrong letters. You're an A&R executive, and you're trying to figure out, how do I communicate with my female artist what she needs to communicate to her audience on what she's trying to deliver, right? Whatever kind of music it is, right? So understanding these base level consistency things will help you kind of shape that through your beliefs, through your upbringing, through your culture and stuff like that, right? And so that's why this is placed later on in the week, because we wanted to get over in the last two live streams cultural differences, and then also just kind of like reading the room, just kind of like knowing that there are nuances to your communication beyond what's on the surface level, right? And so let's get back into
sex differences. So sex differences basically fell into two clusters. So women more than men prioritized good earning capacity, slightly older age, and the qualities associated with resource acquisition.
how many of you believe what he just, how many of you not even believe, but just agree what he said, right? Just think about what he said. There's so much generality here that this is why it's going to create so much controversy, because you're probably going to filter what he said through your belief system, your culture, and possibly your network and your perspective.
Sex differences. So sex differences basically fell into two clusters. So women more than men prioritized good earning capacity, slightly older age, and the qualities associated with resource acquisition. So these are things like a man's social status. Does he have drive? Is he ambitious? Does he have a good long-term resource trajectory, is one way that I like to phrase it, because women often, they don't look at necessarily the resources that a guy possesses at this moment, but what is his trajectory?
So as an artist, what do you think that means? Right? If you were a country singer and you were an up-and-coming country singer, and clearly as a male, you're going to have some of the female audience, right? What do you think that means in general, right, to what you do as a musician? Well, that means that it's possible that we can correlate this to women may be attracted to musicians in terms of listening to their music more if they feel as though this is kind of a growing artist, like they're potentially getting better and improving, possibly with more music or just with their skill set, right? Do we see the same with men? Do you see this? Do you see this with men? And I can give you my example of why I don't see that with men. So when it comes to how men look at artists, for some reason, when Nipsey Hussle passed away, that was when most men wanted to then chime in as fans of Nipsey, right? But when it came to, let's say, the underground artist that's in their city today, most men don't validate that artist until they have done something of substance, right? Whether it's a certain amount of music, maybe they rhyme a certain style that's unique to them, if you want to keep it on the lower spectrum. But on the higher level, then it becomes public recognition, social media, mainstream recognition, and then of course record sales, right? So I can already see the gender difference when you apply it to musicians already with just a little bit of information Dr. Bus has given us.
Women attend to the attention structure. So the attention structure is a key determinant of status. So the people who are high in status are those to whom the most people pay the most attention. Hard work, ambition, does he have clear goals, or is he in an existential crisis, not knowing what he's going to do with his life? Also, women use what's called in the literature mate choice copying. So we've done studies where you just take a guy, photograph him alone, versus take the same guy, put an attractive woman next to him, or put two women next to him, and women judge exactly the same guy to be much more attractive if he's paired with women. From an evolutionary perspective, it's reasonable that women would prioritize these qualities because of the tremendous asymmetry in our reproductive biology.
Okay, so when we think about musicians, how many musicians do you know that are, mainstream artists and doing very, very well, that women are attracted to, that are in a relationship, or have no intention to be in a relationship, yet you can see how many women are attracted to them. How many artists do we know of that happens to? Think of the K-pop bands, think of the Latin brass bands down there where they have a lot of romantic music. Think of all the Indian artists that have very romantic music and things like that. Think of all the jazz musicians that have these like duets and things like that. Country music has a lot of duets and things like that. So it's not really so much that this guy has any real tangible value. It's just that it's perceived because we can market things a few way. We can market a lot of things a few way, but we can also draw conclusions because of our biological impulses, right? If a woman finds a guy cool enough to be close enough to sing a song with, and then she's also respected by other women, then it kind of translates in most people's hindbrain that that guy must be cool enough for her to be close enough to sing a song with because we all like her, right? And it goes the same way for men when it comes to, like I said, the validation of accomplishments. If pretty much you've seen the guy burst every record you can do in record sales, then trying to say he can't do it is almost delusional when it comes to the hindbrain of how men would think about that process, right?
Attractive woman next to him, or put two women next to him, and women judge exactly the same guy to be much more attractive if he's paired with women. From an evolutionary perspective, it's reasonable that women would prioritize these qualities because of the tremendous asymmetry in our reproductive biology, namely that fertilization occurs internally within women. Women bear the burdens of the 9-month pregnancy, which is metabolically expensive, as well as creating opportunity costs in terms of mobility and solving other tasks that people need to solve in the course of their lives. And
so what he's explaining here is that we have an asymmetrical reproductive process, right? Now, part of that plays a role as well, because the way we view this process is going to shape how we have the conversation between one another, right? So if you think of this process any differently, then this may change how you view the people within this process, right? And that's key to understand, especially as a musician, because you may have certain messaging that may go right against your fans' sensibilities and possibly their culture if they view this process this way. Now, this is, again, key to understand because this is a primary thing amongst us humans here, right? This is a big part of like who we are and what we do. So this is important. This is important to understand because there may be, let's say, women in your audience who have husbands who think like this, women in your audience who think like this, and you need to understand that if you want to communicate with them at least appropriately or accurately.
so one way to phrase that is that the costs of making a bad mate choice are much heavier for women when it comes to sexual behavior, certainly, because and the benefits correspondingly of making a wise mate choice are higher for women in the sexual context. But as I said, we have mutual mate choice in our species. And so what do men value more than women? Physical attractiveness. So physical appearance provides a wealth of information about a person's health status, but also provides for men a wealth of information about a woman's fertility, her reproductive value. Now, not that men think about that consciously. I mean, men don't walk down the street and see a woman and think, oh, I find her attractive because I think she must be very fertile. They just find those cues attractive.
So how many of you believe or disagree with that? So there are this huge controversy between women's aesthetic and being talented musicians, right? But the conversation usually stops hard right here, where we can't really pinpoint any way to get around this phenomenon right here, where there is a biological imperative for what men see on women versus how women feel about men, right? This difference right here is usually what creates the biggest controversy for most independent artists and record labels trying to actually understand their fan culture, right? And so when you have a artist that doesn't agree with this, and they have to deal with the general public, like not some clientele, right? Then that means that they have to deal with the communication style of men and women that think just like this, right? And most people generally think like this. Women think that men are visual creatures, and men believe that they're visual creatures. And then we can, like he just said, observe and see such, right? But if you were to go against this in order to, let's say, train your audience to be receptive to your messaging, or let's say your music, there is going to be a challenger up against, because you're directly communicating with somebody that thinks differently than you, right? Now, the reason this is important for musicians is because this would be the equivalent of going up and saying, raise your hands in the air and wave them like you just don't care, and everybody folds their arms. Okay, so this is the point we need to understand here, right? And so you'll have situations where you'll have R&B singers that'll come out very young and very impressionable, and somebody will provide them with this tidbit of information without the full context of what they're really doing, right? And then on the reverse, we will hide this tidbit of information or stigmatize and shame this tidbit of information to where now the young female artist is confused as to why they're not as successful as they could be, because they're not of understanding what's going on.
We know now, based on the last 20 years of scientific studies, that the cues that men find attractive in women are not at all arbitrary. Things like clear skin, clear eyes, symmetrical features, a low waist to hip ratio, full lips, lustrous hair. All these are qualities that are associated with youth and health, and hence have evolved to be part of our standards of attractiveness. And so it's not just that men are these superficial creatures who evaluate women on the basis of appearance. There's an underlying logic to why they do so. And as I said, relative youth, this age thing is one of the largest sex differences you find in long-term mate selection, with women preferring somewhat older men and men preferring somewhat younger women. It's also expressed in preferences. So say a 25-year-old man would say prefer a woman who's 20 or in her early 20s. 35-year-old man might prefer a woman who's in her late 20s or early 30s. 50-year-old man might prefer a woman who's, say, 35 to 38. So marriage and long-term mating are things other than reproductive unions in the modern environment. And if you get too large an age gap, then essentially you're in different cultures. And if the cultural gap gets too large, you don't understand each other.
You see how he then explains how you get into big of a culture, you get in too big of an age gap, there becomes a culture difference, right? And that's simply because of how you communicate with each other, right? And your level of wisdom and then the experiences and that. Now, why and what would kind of dictate these things, right? That's kind of what he's explaining here, is that there are actual logical reasons behind why men are visual creatures and why women are more emotional creatures in terms of their attraction to one another. Women want to see their reproductive results, come to fruition healthy, and they have a huger or a bigger investment here. They have a bigger investment in what they have to bring to the table, right? But then when you think about what men are looking for replication. They want to see good health. They want to see, good beauty and things like that, youthfulness. And like he said, youthfulness kind of goes up and up with certain brackets and certain ages, right? So understanding this, again, as musicians, how does this make sense for you as, let's say, a violinist, right? Let's say you're playing in an orchestra and you're playing violin, right? Well, this kind of shapes how, if you're a violinist, how your entire band functions, right? You may think, oh, because we're musicians, we're just going to turn all this off when we're on stage. Well, the reality is that's ideal, but that's not what's going to happen, right? Usually, as people are, you see it usually in like high school and college, you see marching bands, they spend like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years with each other. It's like 10, 30, 50 single people, right? Eventually, these dynamics are going to start to kick in, right? And it's going to affect how the entire business, in terms of the organization you call a band, functions. And these are going to play a huge role, because how you guys have developed a culture between one another works, right? So if you see, for example, and this is honestly what happens, if you see a super senior start dating a freshman, there is a huge culture difference between them, right? but it's a huge culture difference that's bridged because they're in class together. And so for most of you, you're going to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But he's about to go to college, or should be in college, and she's about to learn fucking geometry, right? And physics. So they having different conversations, but they're still navigating the exact same imperatives that attracted them to one another. And so understanding these things, you'll see how, let's say, when we watch the Gang Gang song, how those kids were in that video. How you will see people 30, 40, 50, 60 in this organization that are now making dance videos with the children of that age, right? That's how that works. So they have to understand the sounds that they love, the culture that they love. They have to bridge that gap between that age difference that they have there. So that's one way you can look at it as musicians. But then, like I said, if you're looking at it as a violinist or something like that, you can look at it as, well, how do all of these people relate to one another in order to make this band work, in order to make this situation work? And we're going to get into a later clip on how, like, being in a group and in a band or an orchestra and symphony can really shape how people are influenced against or towards one another.
Could you tell us about how men and women leverage deception versus truth-telling and communicating some of the things around mate choice selection?
Yeah, well, so basically, both men and women do deceive. So we have the modern cultural invention of online dating. People do lie, but they lie in predictable ways. They lie in ways that attempt to embody the mate preferences of the person they're trying to attract. Both sexes post photos that are not truly representative of what they actually look like. So they might post photos of themselves when they were younger, or they're even advice tips on how to create the best selfie of the best angle that will maximally, enhance what you look like. What happens with internet dating is that the photograph tends to overwhelm all the other cues, and all the other cues are written statements. And we weren't really evolved to process written statements, but we were evolved to respond to physical cues. And men tend to attend to the visual cues much more than women. So women, in their mate selection, they have olfactory cues. So what does the guy sound like? His vocal qualities. That's auditory cues. But olfactory cues, what does he smell like? If the guy doesn't smell right, even if he embodies all the other qualities women want, that's a deal breaker.
So what he's explaining here is a lot of how music marketing tends to work. A little bit, like he's doing it indirectly, right? And so if you were to remove it from online dating to, let's say, marketing an R&B singer, male or female, the photos they take matter, right? The photos they post online matter. So when I'm making the impression that when people have an Instagram and they just do like regular shit all day and they don't really have no brand or identity tied to it outside of just, I just got an Instagram and it's public for no reason. Well, they have to adhere to this exact same process, right? No matter where it is. If you work at your job, if you got a LinkedIn, if you got a R&B singer's profile, to you have a completely curated company corporation's profile, the images you put on there and how you look on the images will reflect how people feel about you and how they think of your brand, right? And again, I'm going to ask again, how many of you believe this and agree with this? So then when you know that, then you can make different decisions when it comes to how you marketing your music. Because when you're marketing your music, let's say as a female singer, and you want to look, let's say modest and cute and things like that, but you have, let's say, vulgar music, it doesn't really correlate, right? A lot of people will stigmatize you one way or another, but the point is if you just don't know that, you will be in for a rude awakening for the results you would like. And that's why I think we need to start bridging the gap between fans and artists and what they're really doing, because I see a lot of artists when they're online, they just doing random things and it doesn't make sense. And now that I'm not really interested in just being on the internet just for being on the internet, it really makes no sense to watch the content. So now I'm watching people just absorb content for no reason that makes no sense, coming from which is supposed to be reputable sources of content. And so pointing it out is offensive because you guys really, really love these people and what they do and what they mean to you and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it really makes no sense. And the only people that benefit it are these, before what David Buss is talking about, online dating companies, which would be like tech companies like Instagram, Meta, and all that stuff like that, right? But the greater point here is to show you guys that, yes, when you guys look at a photo of, let's say, Shinsia, Tim's, Alicia Keys, Rihanna, and stuff like that, and they keep posting them on Twitter, Instagram, and wherever else, Google, or wherever, the Met Gala pictures and all that stuff. Each time you guys share that stuff on your story, or you're like, oh no, they look pretty, and you start buying the dresses, you looking up the Timo stuff, and you put it in your cart and don't buy it because you really got no reason to put it on, because the dude you bought it for doesn't care about that shit, right? So when you really think about all of the stuff that really happens around these musicians, it makes zero sense, but it's all utilized against your biological imperatives. They know, because you like, I don't know, men with deep voices, the next R&B singer is going to have like smooth skin and then a deep voice and sing in a low tone, talking about how much he cares about you, strange woman he never met, right? They know that you can't resist a girl shaking her butt over a sports car, talking about how she's going to cater to you. So they know these things, and they're used as marketing tactics in order to get you guys to purchase music. But again, bridging that gap between artist and fan is one thing. Why do you think a tech company would hire, or not even a tech company, a record label would sign an artist that would not understand this and then employ them to then go on stage and sing music, or let's say perform a certain way? Why would they then shape an artist in, right? And once you start answering those questions, it starts to lead back to what Dr. David Buss is talking about.
Auditory cues, but olfactory cues. What does he smell like? If the guy doesn't smell right, even if he embodies all the other qualities women want, that's a deal breaker. And so I encourage people, just, stop with the 100 texts back and forth or messaging, and meet a person for a cup of coffee. And then, of course, some qualities you can't assess even with a half-hour interaction. You can tell a lot, but things like emotional stability, which is absolutely critical in long-term mating, is to do something like go on a trip together, take a vacation, and where you're even in an unfamiliar environment where you have to cope with things that you're not familiar with. And one of the hallmarks of emotional instability is how they respond to stress. And so this is the sort of information you can't get on a coffee date. You can only get by assessing it over time. So one form of deception, which we haven't mentioned, is deception about whether you're interested in a long-term committed relationship or a short-term hookup. The overt display that, hey, I'm interested in just a short-term hookup, I'm interested in sex, so I want to have sex right now, let's just go back to my apartment. These are very ineffective tactics. So we find in our studies of deception that men tend to exaggerate how similar they are and how aligned they are in their values and religious orientations and political values and so forth. And I think that's probably an evolutionarily recurrent form of deception that women have defenses against.
We talked a little bit about mate choice, but in terms of sexual partner choice, are there any good studies exploring what people are selecting for?
We know.
Well, to kind of double down on what he was talking about as far as that deceptive part about like long-term relationships and stuff like that, you'll see that where you see guys are like, suddenly they're very like, I'm like super feminist, stuff like that, or they're like anti-man because they just think like women love this, right? And you'll see it through usually content creators, but a lot of times when it comes to musicians, you'll see it kind of sprinkle with this I can take your girl attitude thing, because for some reason, I don't know where guys got this. I guess some dude got his heart broke, or maybe it's just a cycle. But essentially what they're saying is that because I can take your girl, I can just take girls or something. I don't know. That just translates to something, right? But in reality, what's actually happening is that they're targeting women that are already promiscuous or cheating on their boyfriends, or already open to cheating on their boyfriends. So it's not really like a win. So the point here is that the deception that they're trying to use is that they're telling that girl that they want a long-term relationship and that they relate to her, and oh, her boyfriend is not good for her and things like that. Or they're saying, I really relate to, the things you drink and the food you like and stuff like that. Like they'll say these things, right? But in all actuality, the investments that they're putting into them is just for some ulterior motive as far as like getting a one up on their actual boyfriend, or just saying how cool they are in the city because this is another notch on their belt, right? So the thing that he's pointing out here is that that can also be used in dating, right? But to relate it back to musicians, many of the times you'll see artists try to do this with their R&B music. They'll have like the lines and lyrics line up with a lot of the sensibilities that they believe women want to hear. Like they'll detail a really intricate or ornate date, and you'll hear it a lot with Drake where he'll try to like express how he thinks she's thinking and stuff like that. And women will do the same where they'll try to talk about how they look in their body and how they feel about the man, and it's supposed to translate to the audience that this is how she feels about you, or at least how a woman feels about you. So these are all things that we all understand when it comes to high level music business, right? And these are all things that we utilize when it comes to high level music business. So now that you've understood this as a fan, how do you navigate this kind of stuff when you're trying to, let's say, listen to what you believe is an authentic, real musician, somebody who's giving their true beliefs, right? So let's get into our next clip here, and we're going to actually deep dive a little bit into kind of how you kind of would have to navigate this in the environment in real time, right? And this is an extreme version of it, but in reality, this is kind of common, right? For, let's say, a male musician who has a relationship, and you again are in what Dr. David Buss was explaining, a pretty much a status position, meaning you have potential, you're good at what you do, and pretty much most people are attracted to you for those reasons that he explained, and you smell good, right? At the end of the day, it's going to create the human phenomena called mate guarding and mate attraction. And so when that happens, what actually occurs? And we're going to get an extreme example here, but it's kind of you're going to see a little bit what Dr. David Buss and Rollo were talking about bleed through in their conversation. And it's also going to happen to one of our favorite rappers ever.
How long were you and Wayne married?
Wayne and I were married for 2.5 years, but we were married but separated. We were really young. Like, we didn't really know what marriage was all about back then.
How old were you when you and Wayne first met?
Okay, so this is Toya Wright, who was married to rapper Lil Wayne. So for those of you who don't know, and this is going to be context, even if I pause it right here, Lil Wayne was actually a hit famous rapper by like 10, 12 years old or some shit. Like, he was in school with a song on the radio, right? So you got to think about what she seen in him to say, I want to be his girlfriend. And then, like she said, on and off relationships, and then eventually marriage. So considering what we just learned, this is Lil Wayne, at least by the time she met him, was at least Dwayne Carter, right? We all can at least assume what it is that made him special, right?
I was 13, 12 or 13, something like that.
So yeah, they met in school, right? And so he was on the radio rapping with, I think it was Young Money back then, or no, Cash Money back then, Cash Money Records. And they were making a lot of noise down there in Louisiana.
Really young when I met Wayne.
Now, was Wayne rapping when you guys met?
He was rapping, but he wasn't a Lil Wayne, you know, like he was kind of jumping on people's songs like BG back in the days. That was before the Hot Boys even came out.
So when we talked about the potential that they would see, he's jumping on songs with BG. Who was BG at the time? Like, we would say these things out loud and we'd just be like, oh yeah, that's just BG. But no, BG was a big deal when Lil Wayne was getting features on his song.
Okay, but he was already on Cash Money at this point when you guys met.
Yeah, he was definitely.
He was already signed to Cash Money Records.
Definitely on Cash Money when I met him.
Okay, so I mean, even though this is not the Wayne of today, I mean, I could imagine, like Cash Money was hot for a very, very long time.
So Vlad is kind of pointing it out right here. He's already doing a good job with his rapping as far as being signed to a record label.
So, I mean, what was it like dating, like, you know, like a little superstar kid like that? Because I'm sure in New Orleans,
Right.
you know, Wayne was a big deal even at 12, 13.
It was a lot. Like, I had to deal with a lot of females. I was put out of school for fighting. It was a lot of drama that came with dating a young rapper.
So she's dating a young rapper for whatever reason we can assume based on what we just learned between how men and women see each other, right? And this being one example, we can use other examples, but this being one example, we can see how the problems that came with being with him did not supersede being with him. Okay. So a lot of times when we deal with these situations as fans, we think like, oh, there's a limitation to what we can say and do and things like that. Well, it really comes down to the value, right? And so we talked about this yesterday when we were saying how the cultural differences are really going to be a hurdle for many people. Well, a lot of the ways that people were getting over those cultural differences was that they increased their value.
That was very popular in the city. You know, and Wayne is very, you know, back in the days, he was charming. So he had his little, you know, pimp.
So he knew how to talk. He was doing really well in business. And clearly he had a lot of other people who were just as attracted to him.
Little ways with all his little girls, I guess, his little young girls. So they just used to come for me. And it was crazy. And then it got better. And then, you know, now we're grown, we're friends, and I'm married. He's in a relationship or whatever, you know, his little situation. And we're, you know, like good friends. We do a great job co-parenting. We laugh about this stuff now.
Back then, what do you think was the craziest situation that ever happened with Wayne and like a female fan?
Whew. It's been some crazy stories. One time a girl spray painted my car pink. Like, it was just like, I used to just have to deal with so much. I had to get out of the city. I was like, it's time for me to leave. Like, this is not going too well.
So why do you think that girl would spray paint her car pink if she really, really liked Lil Wayne? Now, I'm laughing at it because it makes no sense when you're thinking, right? You're thinking right now as we're hearing their story, we're like, wow, this is crazy. Why would anybody do this? Right? But they're in real time, probably young humans in real time reacting to the world in front of them. And so those are the decisions that they made. So some girl just thought it was going to be the right decision to spray paint her car because she's dating a guy that she likes.
But I had fans spray paint my car. They would scratch it up. Like, I mean, just all kind of crazy stuff. Put stuff in the mailbox, and it was just weird.
What actually?
So when you guys are online, this is why also I want to consider too their age at the time. This is why also when I say you guys are online listening to TikToks or reading tweets and Instagram posts and stuff like that, these blogs are usually talking to teenagers, right? So a lot of the content you watch, like Baller Alert, Shade Room, and like it'll be just a fan page for an artist, is usually communicating to a teenager. So if you're triggered and you're like willing to argue and things like that backwards, man, you're more than likely arguing with a teenager who's willing to, you know, adhere to, you know, stupid decisions like painting somebody's car and putting stuff in their mailbox, right? But all of this is to understand that this came from her just being in a relationship with a guy. Her decision to date a certain man got her this result, got her this journey, this end result, this story to tell. Now, if we can sit here and talk about music business, do you think Lil Wayne had any, you know, real authority as far as having to care about this journey, this story, and this decision making, right? Well, no, not really, because by the time she met him, he was a signed rapper. So again, coming back to whether he was a good rapper, whether he was on beat or something like that or stuff like, it didn't matter to her. None of that mattered. It all was null and void because she'd made her decision already. Now, it got so deep, I guess, to the point to where now you have people, you know, having you fighting for your relationship physically and you still would not walk away, right? So Dr. David Buss would tell us that there's some kind of biological imperative that she sees, or that is she's getting from Lil Wayne, that's causing her to make these decisions.
She made you guys decide and get married.
I really don't know. Like, he proposed to me, and it just went from there.
So she don't even know why she married him. He just asked for it and she said yes.
Like, one day, that was like actually his second time proposing to me.
He already asked once.
And we just decided to get married. You know, when you're that young and someone proposed to you, you all excited, like, oh, I'm gonna get married, but not really thinking, you know, about marriage for real and what it's really about. So we was just excited to to say we was getting married, and that did not work.
What made you guys decide to officially get divorced as opposed to just being separated?
I mean, it was a mutual agreement, and we just knew we couldn't do it. Like, we wanted two different things in life. Like, you know, I'm a person that's very family oriented, so
Okay, so if we were to pay attention to what Dr. David Buss told us, essentially what we're seeing here is that she wanted a family, right? She didn't know this, but she wants a family. She wants to have children and raise children with a man, right? The guy she chose to do that with, he was a signed rapper whose agenda was to be the best rapper on Young Money, Cash Money Records event, Drake and Nicki Minaj. So do you see how it now misaligns with what results they now have, right? They're like, they're friends and all that, yada, 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 reality and all that life stuff. But at the end of the day, the decisions that they made had very little to do with the logic that they needed and the understanding that they were missing, right? Because if we knew at the time, in real time, as a 10-year-old rapper, what we were doing with the women as a 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old rapper, I think the decisions would be a little different. If we knew as a young woman who's dating a rapper who's dealing with multiple women at 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, we would make different decisions. But because we don't know, now we're starting to get the results that we get, right? So once we are considering everything we just learned, we have to now think about, well, what would be the real reason you would date a musician? And then what would be the real reason a musician would date, right? What purpose do you bring to one another? Going back to building your network and then understanding how to invest into an artist you say you like. You say you like these artists and you say you want them to be successful. What are you to their network? What are they to your network, right? And if it stops at, like she says, she didn't even know why she married him. She honestly didn't even know why they got divorced. She was just around him, just as many of the other women. They were contending with each other. They were all on the same level for the guy, right? So when we're thinking about this conversation, like I said, if we remove our biases, because some people just believe there's the women are perfect philosophy, where she's cute, so what are we blaming her for, right? But then there's also the men are evil philosophy, where there's probably nothing he ever did right the entire relationship, so that's why she left. The point is that they had two very, very different lifestyles in their heads. And so now they're trying to actually apply it in real life, and it does not work. And so as musicians, when you guys are thinking about this in terms of how you're marketing your music, we talked about that, but also who you're going to get in relationships with, we need to really understand how we're trying to lay out what we're getting from the music industry, right? Because in hindsight, a lot of you would sit here in the comments and be like, yeah, anybody who dates Lil Wayne or marries Lil Wayne should get all of like the benefits and the cool parts of dating somebody like Lil Wayne, right? Well, she chose not to do that. And the answer she's come up with is that she wanted to be a family person. A family person, right? And so a lot of you are family people, and you think you're being helpful by quote unquote tagging along somebody that's trying to do something bigger than just being a family person, right? And again, removing right or wrong, good or bad, my culture says this is what my book says thing. If you remove all of that, it just means that you're now misaligned, right? So you have an option to make, right? Or you have options. You can get on the program of either Lil Wayne or you can separate like they did. And, you know, you just have to be happy with your decision. But at the end of the day, you have to make the decision. And so for a lot of you who are probably going to watch this, you're like, yeah, this is going to be easy. I can do this. I know what I'm thinking right now. This is going to be super clear and easy. It's not, because you'll think about, for her, an example, Lil Wayne or whoever else is not Lil Wayne. The Lil Wayne lifestyle or whoever else is not Lil Wayne, right? And so for some of you, it's probably better for you to just have like a small little plot of land and just stay in your little bubble with you and your kids, and y'all just kind of do your thing. Whereas for other people, they would thrive in a world where they can actually work within the music business and be of value to somebody who's in the music business, right? Regardless of, you know, what comes with that. They thrive in being alongside that, right? And so many of the people who are going to watch this, they're just going to think, yeah, I can do that because I'm a guy. I can do that because I'm a girl. And then that's not true. Some of you will be dating a girl who's a superstar R&B singer, and you can't handle that she has to work all the time. You want to be a family guy with a superstar R&B singer. Like she wanted to be a family woman with a superstar rapper. It just doesn't work.
I do a lot of things with my family, my daughter, and you know, and his career is totally different. You know, his lifestyle just didn't match what I was looking for.
You and Memphis are together now.
Yes. Me and Memphis are married. We're 3 years in, 4 years next year.
Did you have any reservations, you know, getting with another guy in the music industry after already dealing with a man in the music industry?
Yeah, but Memphis was kind of like behind the scenes, so I thought that'd be better because he's not, you know, a rapper. He don't.
So she's still she's still using the same system that she used as a little girl. We're back, and we had a power outage. Everything's. But yes, essentially we watched Toya kind of go through all of the signals and things like that that Dr. David Buss was talking about over and over, right? But the key thing to understand is that that was something that was actually working for Lil Wayne. Like that was something that he was using multiple times. She said he had charisma, which is probably game. He probably just learned game from the older dudes. And he's using game on multiple women, which had them feeling some kind of entitlement individually amongst their relationship with Lil Wayne, right? But the key thing is that he had his favorites and things like that, which goes right into what Dr. David Buss was talking about. How men choose mates and she probably was in his eyes the best selection, which is consistent with her. You know, she's at least the most vocal, consistent, right? So let us get into the next clip, which is going to really highlight a little bit more of the same topic, but we're going to get it again from the perspective of the group, from the groupies. That's how it's going to look now. Go.
This is the Palladium, Hollywood Palladium, very, very famous spot. My high school friend Victor Hayden was Captain Beefheart's cousin. But he looked me up and down and said, "You're a gas. I wish there were more people like you." And I thought, really? I was 16 years old and I was meeting Captain Beefheart. My whole life just completely went into an entirely other direction. And I'm very grateful for that. And we became good friends, me and Don Van Vliet, as close as you can get to Captain Beefheart. I can still see my mom trying to explain to the lumpy old maid VP about the new look in teen fashion. Victor was proud of me, and I figured I looked just right for the Rolling Stones. So we hurtled ourselves to RCA, hoping they might be there recording, and incredibly they were. In school, we went to school the next day, said, "Yeah, we hung out with the Rolling Stones last night." No one believed it.
So she was 16 hanging out with the Rolling. That's kind of ridiculous to think about it. Like, considering the fact that back then they didn't have social media and all this stuff like that, there's no real way for them to have found, you know, consistent ways to find the Rolling Stones. So it was kind of just pure luck at that point.
No one believed us. It was beyond most people's comprehension that you could actually meet the Rolling Stones. And pretty soon at that point, in the next couple of years, they would start going out. I mean, you could hang out with them anywhere. You could they all went to the Whiskey a Go-Go. All the bands from England would hang out at the Whiskey a Go-Go. It became my second home. I was there so much. I knew the owners real well, the manager, and they loved me. They let me in free. I never had to pay. Underage, didn't matter. I could get people out on the dance floor, and they.
So she's even seeing the other side of it as a woman and using her abilities for probably what men were seeing in her. She's probably, young, pretty, charismatic, nice girl. It allowed her to get a lot of benefits when it came to getting the access to different venues she wanted. So most of the times when we're thinking of this conversation, we usually put it in the perspective of men towards women. But this is a good, at least, display of how she's used her feminine version of this exact same process.
Bought me drinks, and they just loved us. And when the GTOs came along, we always got in there and danced. Our first gig was there at the Whiskey Go-Go. This is where the Birds played. Originally, I saw the Birds here first, and how it happened. So I was standing right out there, and I said, I bet that's the back door to the club. And the couple of girls I was with said, so what? And I said, well, I'm going to knock on the door. Oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. Way before the groupie word, remember? Here we go now. And
so this is actually before the groupie word. There was no word to call these women hanging around the club.
And it was Light My Fire. The band had started to play Light. And it was Light My Fire. The band had started to play Light My Fire. And Jim, they didn't know where Jim was. So often they would start the song and hope he'd get up on the stage. and that went on for years. I don't know how they tolerated him. But of course they couldn't have done it without him. I followed him onto the stage. That's how high I was. It was up, but hey, it was Jim Morrison,
So basically, I don't know how old she was. Basically, some girl just walked up on stage with him high as he just lazily walked up while the band tried to get him. Right? Do you see how unprofessional everything is here, right? But the point is that even though there's a lot of unprofessionalism going on, this is still consistent with everything.
So what happened, a roadie came and got me and took me off the stage. And Jim met me. I waited for him, and we went out that night. It was, when he was fighting with Pam, that's the only time you could see him. That's it. That was A&M. And this is the first place I met my very first Beatle. I finally met all of them. Took many years, but I did. We were walking through here to shoot in this big space. The GTOs were going to be the centerfold of Rolling Stone, groupie issue. Baron Woolman, the photographer, the great photographer, their first photographer, he suggested a groupie issue. It's now so collectible. But we were the centerfold, and so we were walking through here in all of our fancy regalia. We were so.
This is the groupie edition of crazy. So they actually kind of helped shape the word, right? So today, when you think of a groupie, what do you think of?
Called up, and one of the girls, Miss Christine, who we called Pumpkin Butt, ran into George Harrison. Literally, physically ran into him, and he turned around and said, "Wow, who are you girls?" And we said, "We're the GTOs." We were so excited to meet George, and he said, "Oh, I've heard of you girls," and that just made it. We had quite a good day that day. So that was my very first Beatle encounter. Also, when the Burritos were debuting themselves, the record was about to come out, there was a huge party in that sound stage. And it was, you got to...
Do you see how there's a consistency in that these are mostly male groups? Because it's not like there weren't female groups out at the time, right? There's male groups, and they all kind of are solidified and on their way up. These aren't just rinky-dink dudes that are playing instruments. These are solidified bands, possibly signed bands, and that they have a specific clean-cut look. Also, when the Burritos were debuting themselves, the record was about to come out, there was a huge party in that sound stage. And it was, you got to hand it to A&M, Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, because no one, it's stunning that they signed a band like that. There was no music like that going on. Graham combines country, rock, and soul into one thing. And he called it Cosmic American Music. And he and Chris, I gotta give Chris a great, they changed music forever. The Eagles wouldn't have existed.
the whole country rock sound, all the alternative country, Americana, whatever you want to call it. It was started by Chris and Graham. Wow. And it's still to this day my favorite kind of music. My favorite live show was the Burrito Brothers at the Whiskey. People think it should be Led Zeppelin or Hendrix because I was on stage with those people, but it was the Burritos because of Graham's soulful singing. It's now the Highland Gardens, but the GTOs used to live here with Alice Cooper. I mean, Alice Cooper lived on one side, we lived on the other. And this room here is where Janis Joplin died. Whoa. It's a very notorious spot. I mean, Jimi Hendrix hung out there with Janis, actually. And Miss Christine in the GTOs was Alice Cooper's girlfriend. They fell in love. She's the one who, well, all of us helped decorate those boys. We put them in girls' clothes and put makeup on them and stuff. There's a really great documentary called Super Duper Alice Cooper, where he gives us the credit for that look, the look of their. They were so amazing.
So if you even pay attention to how she's having a conversation with, once she developed relationships with the artist, you can see how it starts to work both ways, right? It's not that they're just groupies in the sense of like they're just hanging around here to just get free shows and free drugs and hang out and get free, attention. They're actually like interacting and kind of like helping shape a little bit of the band's style and helping their morale and things like that, and just being cool support of the band itself. She does have a clear and good interest in the music itself. Like, she does understand the musicianship side of things. So it's like, I'm assuming that these women are like particular to the music scene of their areas, right? These aren't just fans of the guy because he's cute. These aren't fans of the guy because he's famous. These are actual like music women who are supporters, similar to a male group, right? A fan of music who's not really a musician, but really supports what you're doing as a musician, right? They'll come see your shows, they buy the merch, they want to, help develop the taste and the look and the aesthetic and things like that. They want to be immersed and involved in what it is that you and your band is bringing. So for her, she's been able to create value in that by taking initiative. You can tell by how she's like trying to get backdoor in clubs, how she's helping dress them. She's saying yes to certain opportunities and stuff like that. A lot of people would have shied away from that because they just want to be regular and be family and stuff like that. But all in all, we need to understand this, because if we want to communicate with people like this is how we're bridging the gap between becoming a fan to an investor. We can actually, have these conversations with them on the same language, right? So if she had at that point found a way to become an executive producer or become a designer or found a way to make some kind of contractual employment with what she was offering them, she could get a lot more quote unquote equity from some support she was making from these bands, or even develop her own business on the side. So that's a good way to bridge the gap for you guys if you're trying to figure out how to bridge it for men and women's communication, because it started off as just a musical attraction, romantic attraction, kind of just a, being friends between men and women kind of attraction through music. But because I see no, children and broken heart relationships going on here, at least we can say that this is a good way to utilize all of the cool trigger points that we see going on in intersexual dynamics to help make something really cool.
A crush on the drummer. This was where I lived basically every night, no matter who was playing. You could see Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix Experience, The Who, all in this tiny little club, because they would play big gigs other places, but it was so hip to be at the Whiskey and play here that they would perform here. First time I saw Zeppelin was here. And I had heard from my dear friend Cynthia Plastercaster to stay away from them, that they had a bad reputation already, even when the first album was about to come out. And so I decided I was gonna stay away from them. That didn't work because Jimmy Page came after me. He sent a postcard to one of the BTOs, the Boys Together Outrageously counterpart of the GTOs, and said, Jimmy wants Miss Pamela and all that. And I was like, oh God, I just can't. But of course, he wore me down because he got me to a gig.
So, do you see how the opportunity superseded her sensibilities, her beliefs, and even the warnings from her friends, right? And that's kind of my point in the beginning when I was saying, if you can remove all of those filters that you have in the beginning, you can kind of understand why people make the decision. She can say it in hindsight, but as a young woman, she was told not to work with that band because they had a bad reputation. She didn't specify what, but she was told as a young woman not to work with them as a band. She then decided to heed that information and not work with them. But because that same band approached her with an opportunity for money, suddenly those same warnings, her sensibilities and her basic instincts of safety superseded everything, right? So that's why it's important to understand that when we see, like, why would she date that guy? Why would she get pregnant with him? Why would he get her pregnant? Why doesn't he know that she's a gold digger? Well, this is kind of a good micro version of what we're looking at usually.
There's the troubadour. Many things happen there. I can tell you one of the...
So when they talk about like yes and saying no and stuff like that, this is the nuances that goes within that, right? Why she said yes, when she said yes, what considered a yes to her versus a no to him and things like that, right? So all of that matters.
Trillion, just like the whiskey. I was there the night that Graham Parsons decided he was Keith Richards. They were actually turning into each other. They gave each other's clothes, and Graham was starting to wear eye makeup, which was very uncountry at that time. Still is. I witnessed that, and then Hillman was so pissed off he turned his back to the audience and to Graham to finish the show. It was not a very good show. Also, this is the place where I met Dylan for the first time, and I was introduced to him by Willie Nelson. So that was a great moment, even though Dylan put out his hand and it was like this dead fish.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, he's not a very social person. Mm-hmm. There was a time period though, the time I got to hang out with him, I went to his 50th birthday party, told me he read my book, I was a good writer, and all that stuff went on. And during a very short period of time when he was being social. This house, this apartment on the bottom left here, 1005 North Alfred, is where I lived with a girl named Michelle Meyer, who I met because of the Flying Burrito Brothers. Jim was a very naughty boy when he drank. He pulled out his one night there and took a piss on the bar. Leering the least, however, was the highly dignified Mr. Jagger. He ordered me 2 Harvey Wallbangers at a time, and my hands developed a mind of their own. Last time I saw him, we had dinner on the beach. He texted me and said, I need you in my life. Oh yeah, Bob Dylan called? What? I almost had a conniption fit. Here we are in Laurel Canyon. What I used to consider my backyard, even though I was in the valley, and then I moved to Hollywood. But I stayed with a lot of people here. I crashed at the Zappa house a lot.
And that was one of the things I was going to try to figure out next. It was like, how would a young woman survive in California back then? Single woman, all of these different people. So she's clearly a master at navigating relationships for her to deal with all of these people and not have as many enemies as most would have with coming into contact with so many people, right? So it kind of begs the question as to how she was able to be so successful. And like she said, she was doing a lot of crashing and things like that. Would mean she would do a lot of haggling and negotiating. But the point here is that the way she communicates, the way she navigates the world was completely different than she would have had to do that as a guy, right? As a guy, that conversation about like, I'm gonna go to like a budding band and then they're just gonna let me in the back and give me a J and walk up the back, that ain't gonna happen for most dudes. Like, that ain't gonna happen. You're gonna already have a name for yourself. You're gonna be cool or something like that for that to really work. So to round out today's show, we need to figure out how Rollo is gonna, basically give us a little bit of closure on everything. Let's go ahead and get down one more clip with Rollo. And it's going to help us understand how men and women kind of communicate, but he's going to help us do it in, let's say, a full, I guess you can say, complete message.
Yeah. Let me put Rollo in the spotlight here for a second, because I got a question for you. So,
okay,
like you've been married the longest. Obviously, you got the longest long-term relationship, as far as we all know. 25 years. It's been successful for you. So, question I have for you, since the topic is can a bad marriage, shorten a man's life, is one of the most important things that we've talked about is maintaining frame, right? And how important that is. So, I'm wondering, how often does the Godfather himself, Rollo Tamassi of the Rational Male book series, need to check himself when he's in his long-term relationship and he's like, oh shit, I don't want to send that text, or I don't want to say that, or I shouldn't respond that way, because that's not going to be conducive to mental point of origin and the success of this marriage.
Gosh, I don't think I've ever in the last
or when was the last time that you had to check yourself?
Well, okay, so let me explain a few things here. First of all, it'll be 25 years in the middle of July. Of those 25 years, I think I've had a smartphone for maybe 10 of them, maybe 12. I don't know. Like when did we start like introducing?
2008. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So as far as checking myself, I can count on the fingers of one hand how many times I've had an actual fight with my wife. Like that's lasted longer than like, half a day. My wife is actually pretty good in the sense that she checks herself as well. And I know if women are going to hear this, they're going to go, "Oh my gosh, he must be like, he got her under his thumb. Oh, he's a tyrannical, Tyrannosaurus asshole, right?" No, that's not how it works. It's usually because we have an understanding of like what our effective roles are. Now, remember, when I got married way back in 1996, it was a different thing. Like I wasn't like the red pill Rollo Tamassi that I am today, right? But I will say this is that, and I've said this before, and people like throw rocks at me when I say this, but a good relationship is effortless. A good marriage is effortless. If you want good kid, like what is it? Good marriages create good kids, right? I mean, you've got to be the guy that's going to be right there all the time for you've got to be a good parent, no doubt. But you also have to be self-concerned enough to know that sometimes the decisions that you make are going to be very unpopular with your wife and your kid or whatever, but they're actually what's best for them in the long term.
How many of y'all agree with that and believe that? And so when he says that, right, a lot of y'all gonna just nod your head. Yeah, I agree. Cool. Yup, he's right. Yup, he's so smart. But then in application, it starts to become dissonant, starts to become frustrating, becomes difficult, right? And now, as I'm saying that, how many people are not applying that to themselves, right? How many people are thinking, yeah, when I do, so the point here is that he's going to be highlighting things. Again, if you run it through your biases, your sensibilities, you're going to start to cringe at it. That's what he pointed out earlier about his wife being able to regulate herself, right? Along with him being able to regulate himself. So the key thing here is that they have a specific result and they both are on the same page to get it, navigating through their biological impulses, right? I'm pointing this out to say that you can do the same thing as a musician when you're in the studio, or you're building a business, or you're hiring somebody, or if you're trying to collaborate on a song.
Most guys have that self-doubt. They'll be like, well, I don't want to make the wrong decision, because if I do, then I'll lose my wife and I'll lose my kids. Yeah, because they're in that mode of constant qualification. Whereas if you have frame and you've started out with frame, and I like what Sterling was saying is like that frame is established between the time you first have sex with her and the second time, or maybe the third time that you do, carrying that frame over or not losing it. That is you're going to start your long-term relationship with the frame that you established before you're in that relationship. In the first
she's constantly testing that frame, right?
Yes.
Early on anyway.
Early on anyways. And then once it's like, I think that once women sort of like settle into a marriage or a relationship, and then they know what to expect from you. And if what they're expecting from you is alpha leadership, if they're like my wife's father is very much an alpha male, old school, old Texas guy, right? I mean, the guy is very much alpha, and that's what she expected from me from the beginning. Like I've told this story before. Whenever I would go out on a date with my wife and we were taking her car, she would hand me the keys to her car. And I was the one who was expected to drive her car to wherever we were going on our particular date or whatever it was we were doing.
So how many of you believe or agree with that? Do you see how there's a difference in communication? So however her father communicated to her, her impulses led her to believe that into what she looked for in terms of a husband, right? So there are some people who, regardless of gender, again, removing gender for a moment, they don't want you touching their things. They're super independent. They don't want you involved in their shit. They're so separate from everything. But it comes through this kind of like softness that as a guy, like he said, it seems like you're walking on eggshells. It feels like, oh, if I make the wrong thing, I'm going to be kind of disrupting how she views quote unquote alphas, right? So now you have to navigate, well, does it really matter at the end of the day? A, but then B, is this what you expect in your, I guess, results of the relationship that you want to have, right? And again, tying this to musicians could mean like, you may think a girl you're taking out, you know, to the studio is going to be a lady, is going to be a certain, you know, classy woman, but in actuality, it's Sexy Red. But that expectation just comes from what we think of Sexy Red. In reality, Sexy Red could be a completely nice, docile person, but on camera or on stage, it can be different. So this is why brand communication, how men and women see each other and how men and women interact, is going to be important even as a musician.
And that right there was sort of what set the frame and the tone for our relationship, because that's what she expects of me. She expects me to drive the car. She told me, I mean, I didn't realize it then, but really that act, that symbolism was, I trust you with my life. Here's the cars. Here's the keys to my car. Drive my car to wherever we're going to go. You're the one who's in the headship of this whole situation, and this is where we're going to go.
So this actually is going to be something that you can actually see within musicians and bands. So if you've ever seen a duet happen, or if better yet, when you see dancing, a lot of dances that are happen between a couple, right? You can see how the man has to lead, right? The man has to be the one to direct, you know, control things, right? But there comes a huge level of power in the woman's ability to submit to his leadership, right? So the point that his wife is actually showing to him is that A, you're driving my car, B, you're responsible for driving my car, which comes with all of the things we can come up with, right? But then it's also something she didn't need to be, what's the word I'm trying to say here? She didn't need to be nudged to do that. It was built within her to do that. Like how some people, they have this like rigid, like, that's how I was raised. I can't really change. I don't know what to do. I'm traumatized. When I was a kid, this boy did me wrong one time, so I ain't never, right? Well, that causes friction when you're trying to get a desired result. It may not be with the person you're with. Maybe some dude might understand that and deal with it. But at the end of the day, if you're with somebody who wants a specific result and that's hindering you from getting that, then you have a decision to make. You either need to improve upon yourself in order to get to this point, which is where he was saying his wife knows how to regulate. I'm sure as a young person, she had struggles with, you know, trying to wrangle in things as a young person, right? But she had to learn to improve that for the sake of the result she wants in her relationship, or, you know, just life in general. Like you could be talking to a stranger and this matters, right? So now when you're thinking about, let's say, a musician, this is the real point that I try to drive home with musicians. When you're talking to your fans and it's always like you're trying to be relatable to them, do you see how you now relieve and remove all authority you have as a superstar, right? You want to be relatable, you want to talk on Insta stories, you want to DM your fans, but then when it's time to like actually wield the fist of authority, they don't respect it. And they don't respect it in the sense of like when you're dropping an album, they're not going to come check it out. They're not going to promote it because it's just not built within them, right? And a part of it, this is another part of it that layers into it, is that you might have to train your audience to. So some of us may be dealing with completely fresh, brand new people, right? Like a groupie, like just some person who just loves what you're doing, right? But you have to train them from the beginning what your expectation is in order to get the result you want. Otherwise, you're just going to leave it up to them, and more than likely, they're not going to get it right. So when we say this and we look at what Rollo's explaining here, most of what he's going to show us is going to come from relationship side, but it's going to bleed into music and business and things like that and stuff like that. But you got to look at this as something that's an understanding and not a stigma. Like you don't want to wind up, you know, hating men or women because of it. It just is what it is type of situation.
Guys are going to go, well, it's different for you, Rollo, blah, blah, blah. And like, no, it's establishing that frame and living out that frame. So when guys say, oh, well, Rollo, I pity Rollo because he has to game his wife all the time. Just like you were saying, like if I get a shit test from my wife, it's not like I go, let me look at my notes here.
That's a lot of notes.
Let's see.
Perusing through YouTube to find answers.
Rollo, what would Rollo do? Right? Yeah, exactly. That's not how it works. Okay, it's
Ample case says on page 92.
Yeah, it's second nature to me, right? It's like it's not like an act anymore. It's who I am. The game, right? It's who I am and what I'm going to do. When God
Okay, so that part he said it very clearly, and I'm sure there's deeper explanations, but I'm gonna dive into it a little deeper. He said it's who I am, right? And so when we look at the Lil Wayne example, Lil Wayne wasn't being out of character. That's the key thing. Like if you see these guys that like when they finally get into the NFL or finally get a good job or finally get some money or something like that, they start to change, right? Well, a part of it is that they now have the opportunity to really show who they really are. And that if you don't like it now, then it is what it is, right? But what he's saying is that when it comes to what people expect of him, this frame that he's setting for everybody, he set it just by being naturally who he is. So if he's a guy who shies from confrontation, then it is what it is. If he's a guy that is not willing to, shake up the scene, then it is what it is. But a lot of times you guys are going to be dealing with situations that aren't going to push you to that point. So this is kind of where I think the practice has to come into play. Like you have to almost look for these opportunities in the sense of being exposed to them, not just manufacturing them, but just kind of like if you're out and about and you want to be a superstar musician, you want people to like you, open to talking to you, then you need to pursue conversations. If you want to be a person that's super attractive or, visually, aesthetically pleasing, then you need to pursue the practices that get you there, which would be like eating better, sticking into the gym and dressing a certain way, or, understanding how you dress and things. But all of that allowed him to develop who he is at first, and then it attracted whoever he was attracted to. What most people will try to do is that they'll try to pick up an instrument and just manufacture all of this. They're going to try to say, well, this is cool. If I act like this, people will like it. Well, this is sexy. If I look like this, then people will think I'm sexy. But that's not how it works. And that's not really something you can build a foundation on.
Guys like say when guys hit me up and they go like, oh, how do you be alpha? If you're asking me how to be alpha, it has to be, I hate to call it Zen, but you have to be that. You have to be the game. You have to be the alpha. You have to internalize it. It has to become part of your personality. It has to be your second nature. And when I say that, it really rubs women the wrong way because they think that I'm trying to brainwash guys. It's like, no, I'm giving them what you want. Actually, eventually you want a good, successful, healthy, fun, awesome relationship where you're having sex and you're really in love with each other and you're good for your kids and you're good for each other. I'm trying to give guys that so that you can have what it is that you actually think that you don't know that you need it, but that's what you really want. And so when I say, like if my wife gives me a shit test, it's not that I don't get shit tests. I do. It's just that I pass them by not thinking about how to pass them. I just default to sort of my red pill awareness, my red pill nature. So when I have these conversations where it's like, oh, we really need to move, or I really like this house in Cape Coral, I really like this place over here, I'm just like, I know where we're going with that. And it's like, no, that's not going to satisfy you. I'm not going to make decisions based on like, because you fell in love with a new house or you fell in love with a new place or you want to get a new pet, right? Like that kind of stuff. It's like, I have to be the one who's going to pull the trigger. I can make an emotional decision or I can make a rational decision. And it's like defaulting to what's going to fit the best, what's best for the family. And I don't think enough guys do that because they think in terms of like egalitarian equalism, right? They think, oh, well, even Steven, she got to decide last time, so I get to decide this time. And usually it's guys who are just end up supplicating all the time. And the reason why they won't take authority or they're afraid to experiment in their relationships is because if they do and things go south, then they could be divorced or their wife will hold out on them because they're their only source of sex. There's all kinds of like leverage that the average beta male sort of married guy has to contend with. So it's, again, that's why these guys in this article that you're just quoting here, it's like, that's why they're unhealthy.
So when you consider that, just if you want to talk about the relationship side of things, you could. But honestly, if you're thinking about like a fan base, right? We talked about Davido coming to America and collaborating with certain people and how his fans were kind of like feeling like he should make certain decisions based on their behalf, right? Or based on what they believe is right or wrong. Well, most of what you're seeing a lot of times when that happens is quote unquote, I guess, not missed up, but like a shit test. That's what I'm trying to say. A shit test. And it's really your fans trying to figure out, are you the authority figure when it comes to what it is that you're doing, your creation, and all of what you're bringing, right? And like he said, it's probably just an inherent thing that fans, or in this context, your girl would do. But how you would quote unquote pass it is really down to how you naturally respond to it. Don't try to like game it or anything like that, right? And so now that we're considering this, do you see artists a different way? Because again, we consider and say, oh yeah, he's right. He's super smart, super right. Yep, 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 yep. Until we become the person that's becoming the hindrance to this quote unquote beta male in this, right? If you're the wife that's gonna have on the table an option on the table of your attitude or how you interact with them, and it's gonna change how you feel about them, or you're no longer gonna do X, Y, and Z and things like that. How do you then view this person? What is this person to you, right? Just like if you had an artist, right? And this artist suddenly started making country music with bagpipes. Would you support the album? Would you keep playing their music? Would you repost their Instagram story, right? It starts to make sense, right? What we're observing here. That's why I said in the beginning, if we remove our sensibilities of, let's say, I love this person or this person's mine, then you can look at your behavior on a very, very logical, like you said, rational level and say, okay, maybe I should make this decision. Right? And that's something that, again, you're going to be challenged with, because you're going to have to do it in situations that it may not benefit you, especially if you're like a Toya Wright, for example. For her to think, I want a family with this particular man, would mean for her to keep this relationship long term, she would have to give that up, or at least change how that looked, right? So for you to do that, that means that's tough for you, not the artist. That doesn't mean the artist now has to change anything, right? That means as a fan, you now have the understanding. So then let's flip it back onto the artist. If suddenly your fans started like asking for, I don't know, 808 beats, and you're a country musician, like they want more digital music involved into your creation, what do? Do you start holding back, withholding from your fans and things like that, and being the type of person to say, well, since you didn't give me what I want, I'm going to treat you a different way, right? Is that what you should do? Well, no, that's not what you should do, because that wouldn't make sense. So that's all he's laying out here, is that this happens usually in terms of relationships between a husband trying to appease or be equal and everything, like I said, relating to everybody else instead of just being the pure source of creation and things like that.
Because they're constantly trying to figure out, they're trying to resolve the mystery of women, right?
A lot of that comes from religion too.
Yeah, and religion as well. Well, the religious part.
I mean, that study with the scientists was cited from Israel, right? And that's also embedded in Jewish religion, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Abrahamic religions for sure now, anyways.
Yeah.
But it's you have to remember that for modern religions to thrive right now, they depend on monogamy, because if they don't have that woman in the church, if they don't have that, like, remember, women don't earn as much as men, but they spend more than men. So they still need those women. That's why there's like ministries for single mothers and ministries for single women and stuff. And they'll blame it on men for not picking up the responsibility, which is their biblical, godly responsibility to do so.
So let's pause here for a second. Can we tie this to the music industry? Is this if that was a fact that you believe, or you to understand to be true, could we tie that to the music industry, that women would actually buy more? They produce more, right? So would you consider that with, let's say, a female artist? You were signing one as a record label. Consider that. Would you consider that as a male artist who has a female audience? Would you consider that, right? Because a lot of times when we think of, let's say, a rapper, we just assume it's just a bunch of dudes spending the money. Just to assume every album and all that stuff. We don't ever consider the girl who's having a crush on a guy that looks nothing like what she's supposed to be dating. We don't assume Lil Wayne was your daughter's crush. Like, we don't assume that, right? We don't assume NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and things like that, right? We always assume it's a bunch of men with all the money, spending all the money, running everything up, right? So do we really consider that in the music industry? And how is that utilized against you as fans or for you as artists? Because if you're a female fan right now and you heard what he just said, and we apply that to your favorite artist right now, would you kind of believe that to be true, that you spend a lot more than you produce on, whether if it's not music or it's your favorite thing or whatever you're into? Again, removing our sensibilities and how we feel about men and women and stuff like that. How do we understand what we're looking at?
What they're, I mean, from a practical perspective, from the latent purpose of the whole thing, it's because those guys are going to probably earn more money. That means more tithe checks, more kids, more whatever. I'm not saying it's bad for society, but let's look at what the mechanics are of monogamy, because most modern, like, Judeo-Christian religions, anyways, anything like that is dependent on, even you could even make the case for Islam right now. Even if you got four, if you're rich enough to have 4 wives, you're probably rich enough to be contributing to the church. Mm-hmm. So there's an economic aspect that goes along with that too.
Ryan, same question to you, man. You're coming up on a decade. I wasn't going to let you off the hook on this one.
All the time, dude.
Check yourself all the time?
Well, not that, like, every time you do something, you have to take some self-reflection. Every now and then the girl will get, like, get mad. They always get mad, and flows coming, whatever reasons you want to do. And then sometimes you kind of aren't paying attention, so you get mad back, but then you just check yourself. I'm with Rollo. Like, I think it's 12-year anniversary coming up now. I can count on one hand the amount of, like, actual fights where I was literally mad to where one of us wanted to leave the house. And even then, in retrospect, when I look at those, outside of the emotions, they weren't really of very much consequence either. But that's the thing with this. It's not, Rollo always says, I am the game, and then idiots always like, well, that just means Rollo thinks he's hot shit. It's like, no, it's not it. It's, you have your life, and it's going to go the way it goes. And then whatever happens around that is not my concern. Like, case in point, like, I'm not married. We did common law. In Canada, they have the wonderful thing, well, you live together, good enough.
Tomato.
Yeah.
Got it.
But it was, and my brother's the same way. He's with a girl right now. He's about to have a kid. They never got married. But that's just because that's in our frame. We watched our parents divorce. Like, my mom's divorced twice. Absolutely brutal. Destroyed everybody. A lot of kids, a lot of issues. But we're just kind of like, well, I'm not doing that because there's nothing in it for me. And that's like the marriage approach. Everybody always takes it. And that's what I hate too. The marriage is like, well, you have to be married, and you're trying to talk people out of it. It's like, no. Give me a good reason to do things that aren't in my best interest. And I think once you approach things from that, like, I'm more than happy to sacrifice myself for some greater good. But if you don't make the case to me, it's not my job to make the case. I'm not.
And so this is how a lot of people are actually navigating business in general now. And that's why I was naming this theme about networking, because most of what we're going to be seeing and navigating with the AI conversation, job layoffs, employing people, trying to get artists to work with record labels and stuff like that. It comes down to that conversation. How can you convince me to do something against my best interest, right? And a lot of it is going to come down to communication, and it's going to come down to the results you desire with who you're communicating with. So many of you think that just because you're a girl, you get some kind of expectations or entitlement, but you have to be able to justify it. And vice versa for dudes. Like, just because you're a guy, you have to justify it. But the problem is if you don't know how to justify it, then you're not really going to be able to navigate getting the results you want. So, like, if you're a girl who's a groupie and you want to be backstage with bands in LA in the 70s and 80s, well, how do you do that? And how do you do that safely? And then for a guy, if you want to have a girlfriend who listens to you, respects you, and doesn't raise her voice and things like whatever you expect for your girlfriend or whatever, well, how do you do that? And how do you do that safely, right? And so as we're navigating this as artists, we got to think about this kind of dynamic consistently, because it transcends music business as well. Because if you're a fan of, let's say, David this year, well, you just found out the artist David is now on trial for chopping up a little girl that he was dating. We can consider why that little girl liked him. We can consider why he liked that little girl. We consider why she was in the predicament she was in. And we consider why he was across the ocean on stage singing about possibly the predicament itself, right? But at the end of the day, the mechanics of their relationship more than likely follow this line of thinking. He was an up-and-coming artist. He was actually solidified in the fact that he was on tour and signed. A lot of women also enjoyed him and his music as well. And then the reaction to him being into the darker sides of things like violence and murder and romance and stuff like that is attractive to a lot of people. So these are things that are going to bring attraction to him, but then in application, suddenly we don't like these things, right? And you'll see this a lot with fan to artist reactions, from record label to artist interactions. And this, again, application of what we're really trying to say out of our mouths versus what we really do with our bodies needs to be in alignment, if not understood, for us to really get the best, I guess, result out of the music industry, right? So I have one more little piece of a funny little, I guess you can call it like a post that I got from the internet, but it's going to highlight in a nutshell how men and women communicate differently. And it comes from a girl, and I don't remember who she, but I'm going to read it for you guys, and it's going to kind of highlight how men and women communicate differently. And again, that when it's applied, it has to be respected because we understand one another. Not that we desire a different outcome, not that we have a certain expectation or entitlement to one, but just because we just simply understand and want to get a desired result. So let's pull it up here. So it says, some women expect their husband to respond with the emotional cadence of a girlfriend, long emotional breakdowns, constant reassurance, and endless discussion. Meanwhile, he's thinking, just say what the issue is. A lot of women say they want a masculine man, so masculinity actually shows up. Then suddenly he's too blunt, too intense, too direct. This he's a man, you're not your homegirl. That doesn't mean disrespect is okay. Yelling, insults, intimidation, and cruelty are still wrong. But some women interpret every firm tone, short response, or logical answer as he's being mean because it lacks the emotional softness they're used to from female or girl relationships. Men and women communicate differently. Sometimes you want, oh, babe, I completely understand how you feel. And he gives, okay, so what are we going to do about it? Not because he doesn't care. He's literally talking like a man. He's literally just talking like a man. I'm sorry, I lost my place. We have a lot less conflict in marriages and in the context of this show, relationships or business, if we stopped expecting our husbands to communicate exactly like another woman would. You keep trying to feminize male communication style and wonder why conversations are frustrating. Every serious sentence is not an attack. Every direct tone is not hatred. Every short answer is not emotional neglect, right? So, as we can read that, a lot of us will then, we'll clap our hands, we'll tap our fingertips and snap our fingers and stuff like that. We'll do all that. And, oh man, that was dope. That was dope. But I want you to see, there's the reason I held that for the end and not the beginning. I want you to see how you can transcend all of that information, or you can see through all of that information and still see the consistency, what's there, right? The ability to communicate with each other is going to be key in business because you're going to have to take a step back from what it is that you believe and actually understand what the other person believes, right? So as in this example of text, if he says, well, what can we do about it? Or what are we going to do about it? You have to now, in this moment, just like if you were in a record label meeting, if you were in front of a fan, if you were tweeting on Twitter, reading an email from an executive, in this moment, you have to be able to take your talent and understand what they're communicating to you. Otherwise, you're going to be inaccurate. Otherwise, you're going to be wrong. Otherwise, you're going to cause an argument and cause a disruption to the business, right? There's another video we'll probably go over tomorrow where a gentleman was saying why they got rid of their human resource department. And he was saying the human resource department was creating issues. And it came from a breakdown in communication. And they said once they got rid of the HR department, everything suddenly just fixed itself. So as we'll break that down tomorrow, we'll be able to kind of deep dive a little bit more into this communication networking theme that we have going on this week. But I do want to get you guys out of here so we can. So this was Musician Talks with DameSmiff. We talked about the dynamics between men and women, explored a little bit of Rollo Tamassi, David Buss, and got a little bit of hip hop celebrity in there too. So I will see you guys tomorrow morning for the next episode, and I'm out, y'all.